In the summer of 1997, a wildfire crew hiking through a remote section of the Canadian Rockies stumbled across something that shouldn't exist. Half buried in decades of mountain soil and alpine debris, rusted beyond recognition, sat the corpse of a machine so massive it seemed to defy the landscape itself. 10 feet tall, 20 tons of iron, designed to conquer winter, abandoned to rot in silence. This wasn't just scrap metal. This was a Rotary snowplow, one of Canadian Pacific's most fearsome and expensive pieces of equipment, left to die in a place where no tracks existed for miles. How does a machine worth hundreds of thousands of dollars simply vanish? And more importantly, why? The answer takes us back to a time when keeping the rails open through the Rockies wasn't just an operational challenge. It was a battle against nature itself, fought with steam, steel, and the kind of engineering hubris that builds empires and buries mistakes. The Canadian Pacific Railway didn't just cross the Rockies, it punched through them with a violence that redefined what was possible. When the line opened in 1885, it promised to unite a nation separated by 3,000 miles of wilderness. But the section through British Columbia, particularly Rogers Pass and the Selkirk Range, turned out to be more than just difficult. It was actively hostile. Avalanches here weren't occasional winter nuisances, they were seasonal certainties. Between November and April, snow would accumulate on the steep mountain faces above the tracks, sometimes 15, 20 feet deep. When the temperature shifted or the wind changed direction, entire hillsides would let go. Workers called them White Death. Railway engineers called them operational hazards. Maintenance records from the 1890s documented 62 avalanche strikes on the CP main line in a single winter season. Some buried track sections under 30 feet of compacted snow that turned to ice within hours. Traditional snow removal methods, men with shovels, small plows pushed by locomotives, were useless against these volumes. You couldn't shovel your way through a 100-yard section of snow compressed to the density of concrete. CP needed something that could chew through ice, blast through drifts, and keep moving no matter what nature threw at it. They needed a monster. The rotary snowplow wasn't invented by Canadian Pacific, but they perfected it. The basic concept came from a Toronto dentist named J.W. Elliott, who patented a design in 1869 after watching a grain thresher and imagining the same principle applied to snow. By the 1880s, American railroads in the Sierra Nevada were experimenting with steam-powered rotaries, machines with massive spinning blades mounted on a reinforced frame, pushed by one or more locomotives. Canadian Pacific bought their first rotary in 1887. Within 5 years, they operated a fleet of them across the mountain divisions. The model discovered in the Rockies decades later was a Leslie Brothers Type O manufactured in Paterson, New Jersey in 1911. Its specifications read like something designed for industrial warfare, a 10-foot diameter cutting wheel with 12 curved steel blades powered by a dedicated 400 horsepower steam engine capable of throwing snow up to 150 feet in any direction using an adjustable discharge chute. Weight, 87 tons fully loaded with coal and water. Crew, 7 men minimum, 1 engineer, 1 fireman, 1 blade operator, 1 chute operator, and 3 spotters. Cost new, $42,000. In 1911 money, that was enough to buy 20 houses in Vancouver. The machine worked like a mechanical hurricane. As the rotary advanced into a snow blockage, the spinning wheel, turning at 120 revolutions per minute, would bite into the compacted mass, shredding it into fragments that shot up through the collection hood and out the discharge chute. Behind the rotary, 2 or 3 locomotives provided pushing power, their combined weight and traction forcing the entire assembly forward at speeds ranging from half a mile per hour in heavy, wet avalanche debris to 5 miles per hour in lighter powder. Inside the rotary's cab, Conditions were hellish. The boiler radiated heat like a blast furnace, even in sub-zero temperatures. Steam pressure gauges needed constant monitoring. Too low and the cutting wheel would bog down. Too high and you risked an explosion. The noise was physically painful. Metal screaming against ice, steam hissing, the continuous roar of snow being pulverized and ejected. Workers wore scarves wrapped around their faces against the steam and flying ice particles. Visibility was near zero. You operated by sound, by vibration, by years of experience telling you when the wheel was about to jam or when the engine was being pushed beyond its limits. And then there was the danger. Rotary crews knew that at any moment they could hit a buried obstacle, a boulder caught in an avalanche, a tree trunk, even parts of derailed freight cars. If the cutting wheel struck something solid at full speed, the entire machine could lurch, throw men against iron walls, or worse. Maintenance logs from Rogers Pass documented 12 serious injuries and 3 deaths in rotary operations between 1910 and 1916. One crew member lost both hands when a blade shattered and sent shrapnel through the cab. Another suffocated when the discharge chute clogged and redirected steam back into the operator's compartment. But CP kept running them because there was no alternative. The rotaries were expensive, dangerous, and brutal to maintain, but they kept the line open. During the winter of 1913-1914, one of the worst on record, rotaries cleared more than 400 miles of blocked track across the mountain divisions. Without them, the entire transcontinental service would have shut down for months. That's what makes the discovery in 1997 so baffling. Why would CP abandon a machine this valuable, this essential, in the middle of nowhere? The wildfire crew that found the rotary wasn't looking for railway history. They were cutting a fire break through dense underbrush when one of them, a seasonal worker named Michael Chen, noticed something that didn't fit the landscape, too geometric, too regular. He called the crew chief over, and they spent 20 minutes pulling away layers of moss, pine needles, and decomposed wood before they realized what they'd uncovered. The cutting wheel was the giveaway. Even rusted and half-collapsed, the curved blades were unmistakable. Someone contacted Parks Canada. Parks Canada contacted the Canadian Railway Historical Association. Within a week, a team was on site documenting what they'd found. The rotary was approximately 3 miles from the nearest existing railway line, in a narrow valley that had never been part of the CP mainline route. It was sitting on what appeared to be remnants of temporary track. Rail sections laid directly on the ground, heavily corroded but still visible beneath decades of soil buildup. The machine itself was in catastrophic condition. The boiler had cracked open, probably from freezing and thawing cycles over decades. The cutting wheel was partially detached. The cab had collapsed inward, but the brass identification plate was still legible, Leslie Brothers, number 403, 1911. Railway historians cross-referenced the serial number with CP maintenance records, and the story began to emerge. Rotary 403 had been assigned to the Rogers Pass section in 1911, right after delivery from the factory. It operated there for 5 years without incident, well, without major incident. Maintenance logs showed the usual catalogue of mechanical failures, cracked boiler tubes, worn blade bearings, damaged steam lines, but nothing catastrophic. The machine did its job. Then in 1916, Canadian Pacific made a decision that would reshape the entire mountain crossing. They started construction on the Connaught Tunnel. The tunnel was a direct response to the avalanche problem. Instead of fighting nature, CP would go under it. 5 miles long, bored directly through Mount Macdonald, the Connaught Tunnel would bypass the worst of the Rogers Pass avalanche zones. It was one of the largest railway tunnels in North America at the time, an engineering achievement that would cost lives, millions of dollars, and years of labor. It would also make the surface route and its rotary snow plows obsolete. Construction began in 1914. The tunnel opened in December 1916. Overnight, the old surface track through Rogers Pass became a secondary route, then an abandoned route. CP rerouted all mainline traffic through the tunnel. The need for heavy snow removal on that section evaporated. But here's where the story gets complicated. Rotary 403 didn't stop working in 1916. Maintenance records show it was reassigned to the Kicking Horse Pass section farther east, where winter operations still required rotary plows. It worked there through the 1920s. By 1928, the records become spotty. By 1930, they stop entirely. The machine simply disappeared from CP's inventory books. The most likely explanation, pieced together from fragments of documentation and oral history interviews with retired railway workers, goes like this. In the late 1920s, Canadian Pacific was in the middle of a massive equipment modernization program. Diesel-electric locomotives were beginning to prove their worth. Newer, more efficient rotary plows were being manufactured with lighter frames and improved cutting mechanisms. The old Leslie Brothers Type O machines, built with early 1910s technology, were becoming maintenance nightmares. Parts were expensive and hard to source. The boilers required constant attention. The weight made them difficult to position quickly. CP decided to retire the oldest units. Some were scrapped for metal, some were sold to smaller railways, and some, particularly units that had been worked hard in the mountains and showed serious wear, were simply written off. Rotary 403 had developed a chronic boiler problem. Records from 1927 mention repeated failures of the firebox crown sheet, a critical component that, when cracked, could cause a catastrophic explosion. Repairing it properly would have required shipping the entire machine back to the factory or undertaking a complete boiler replacement at the field BC maintenance facility, a process that would cost thousands and take months. CP made a cold business calculation. The machine wasn't worth fixing, so they did what railways sometimes did with equipment too expensive to scrap properly and too damaged to sell. They ran it to the end of a spur line and walked away. The temporary track the wildfire crew found likely represented exactly that, a dead-end spur, possibly built for logging or construction access decades earlier, that provided a convenient dumping ground for obsolete equipment. Someone would have fired up the rotary one last time, crept it slowly along the deteriorating track, and left it there when the boiler finally gave out or the track ended. No ceremony, no announcement. Just another piece of industrial equipment outliving its usefulness, abandoned in a place where it would cost more to retrieve than it was worth. And then the forest grew over it, and the world moved on. The discovery in 1997 raised uncomfortable questions about what else might be out there. Canadian Pacific operated thousands of pieces of specialized equipment across its network over more than a century. How many machines were simply abandoned when they became inconvenient? How many ghost sites exist in remote valleys, buried under decades of vegetation, slowly dissolving back into the landscape? Archives showed that CP wasn't unique in this practice. Railways across North America routinely disposed of obsolete equipment by abandonment, particularly in remote areas where salvage was impractical. In the 1990s, hikers in Montana discovered an entire graveyard of Great Northern Railway steam locomotives in a box canyon, left there in the 1950s when diesel transition made them worthless. A logging railway in Oregon had dumped 4 rotary plows in a ravine in 1932, where they remain today, too inaccessible to remove economically. The business logic was brutal but understandable. These machines had served their purpose. They'd paid for themselves many times over in revenue generated by keeping lines open. When they broke down beyond economical repair, keeping them on the books made no sense. Moving them cost money. Scrapping them properly cost money. Leaving them to rust cost nothing. From an accounting perspective, Rotary 403 ceased to exist the moment it was written off the inventory. What happened to the physical machine was irrelevant, but standing in that narrow valley in 1997, Looking at 10 tons of rusted iron that had once been essential to the operation of a transcontinental railway, the story felt different. This wasn't just obsolete equipment, it was a memorial to a particular kind of industrial ambition, the belief that any problem could be solved by building a bigger machine, applying more force, spending more money. The rotary snowplows were remarkable achievements. They worked. They kept the railway open through conditions that would have shut down operations for months. But they were also band-aids on a fundamental problem. The track shouldn't have been there in the first place. Building a railway across the Rockies at track level through Rogers Pass was always going to be a battle against avalanches. The rotaries didn't solve that problem. They just made it survivable until a better solution, tunneling through the mountain, became feasible. Rotary 403 represented millions of dollars in capital investment, thousands of hours of skilled labor, and years of dangerous operation, all rendered obsolete by a single engineering decision. Dig deeper. Parks Canada considered several options for the abandoned rotary. Moving it to a museum would cost an estimated $250,000. The machine was in such poor condition that any attempt to relocate it would require complete disassembly, conservation treatment for each component, and specialized transport. Restoring it for static display would cost more. Leaving it in place and creating an interpretive site was discussed but rejected due to the location's remoteness and lack of existing trail access. In the end, they documented it thoroughly, took detailed photographs, removed the identification plate for archival preservation, and left the rest where it was. The forest is reclaiming it. In another 20 years, it will probably be impossible to find without GPS, coordinates, and a machete. There's something fitting about that. The machine conquered winter for a generation, then winter conquered it. The mountain that it helped the railway cross now holds its remains. It's not really abandoned anymore. It's been absorbed, becoming part of the landscape it once fought against. What we call progress often looks like this. Tools built for impossible tasks, used until something better comes along, then discarded without ceremony. The rotary snowplows were marvels of their era, and they're almost completely forgotten now. Most people have never heard of them. The ones that survive in museums are curiosities, their purpose almost incomprehensible to visitors who've never seen a 40-foot snowdrift. But for 30 years, these machines were the difference between a functioning transcontinental railway and an expensive mistake. Men risked their lives operating them. Companies invested fortunes building and maintaining them. Communities depended on them keeping the line open through winter. And then one day, they were obsolete, not gradually. Suddenly, the tunnel opened and an entire category of essential equipment became worthless overnight. You can find Rotary 403 on specialized railway history forums now, listed among lost and abandoned equipment. Enthusiasts trade theories about why it was left there, whether it could be recovered, what it might look like restored. But most people scroll past without noticing. It's just another rust pile in the woods, another machine that served its purpose and faded away. Maybe that's the real story. Not that the machine was abandoned, but that we've forgotten why it mattered in the first place. The railway still runs through the Rockies. Trains still cross through the Connaught Tunnel every day. The snow still falls on Rogers Pass every winter, 30, 40, 50 feet deep in places, but nobody needs to fight it anymore. We built a better solution, and the monsters we created to fight the old battle just faded into the forest, their purpose fulfilled, their struggles forgotten. What other essential things have we already abandoned, and we just haven't noticed yet?